All right. Well, another exciting week in American history. Uh, our friend Vivek Ramaswamy, the young, annoying millennial, he's number three. I mean, that's Trump is in front of everybody by double digits, 30 points at least, probably 40. And then it's Ron DeSantis. He's the governor of Florida right now. And then Vivek Ramaswamy, who's not a politician at all. So interesting. And he used to be anti-Trump. Now he's Trump. You know. Oh.
Like Chris Christie really brought up during the really shits on Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is funny that Chris Christie would bring that up because, like, dude, you used to be golfing buddies with him. Like, you can't really throw shade at somebody for being friends with Trump when you were like besties with you. Helped make the man.
Someone's death and like autopilot for a while.
Oh yeah, no, I know. Yeah, it says a lot when it's like Chris Christie is like the most rational sounding candidate on the stage. I don't know. That's saying a lot. It's saying a lot. Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't cover any ground history wise last week. But that's okay. I feel like um I feel like when stuff happens to line up so well like that we can just do that for our class instead. It's very, very worth it because, I'd be willing to bet 80% of us in here had never watched a presidential candidate debate one way or the other, primary, whatever party. So it's good, it's good to kind of familiarize yourself with things. And yeah, they can be a little bland sometimes, but they're in today's political climate. It's like, well, they're pretty interesting actually. They're not like snoozers. I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of drama. And if there is a Democratic one, I guarantee that will be probably just as crazy. They were pretty crazy 4 years ago. Um, Mitch McConnell, who's the leader of the Senate, he's a senator from Kentucky. He's 81 years old. He looks older than electricity. Like he also looks like he's never smiled a day in his life. Like he has a permanent frown. He's a creepy, conniving guy. And he's the one that like walked out after January 6th and said, yeah, Trump was definitely guilty of trying to overthrow the government, but we voted against impeaching him. Like just said it. Like, yeah, we did this for political purposes, which didn't work out super well for them. Like, had they done that, Trump just couldn't run for office ever again. So that they don't have to think about it. Like, it's like, well, you can move on now, and whatever the next chapter of the GOP or conservatives is. But
same time, if you do that, all the people who are diehards Trump will hate all of them.
Yeah, but as long as they're not voting Democrat, it doesn't really hurt the GOP. I mean, yeah, it diminishes their base a little bit, but I think that's already happening. There's already a bunch of people that are like, they won't vote for any of those candidates if Trump isn't elected. Like, so there also conservatives are like turnout. They have lower voter turnout than liberals, which I think is kind of telling of the two mindsets, right? Like, so conservatives are always wanting to conserve, keep things the way they were, or no change, or as little change as possible, or let's change, but we'll change to go back to the good old days, make America great again. Where like progressives, and I'm not liberals are like, that's a very wide term. I don't think it means the opposite of conservative. I think progressive does. And that's, obviously forward thinking, progress, like thinking about the situation and the problems we have today, not the ones we had, it's funny. It's so funny to like listen to any kind of conservative media because they're always talking about communism. And it's like communism's not really the thing it was, like 50 years ago. There's not there's not going to be a communist takeover in America, and it's not really a threat of becoming a global, worldwide revolution at this point either. So yeah, China's communist, but they're not communists. They're the fastest growing segment of millionaires in the world. Like uh, for the last 30 years, like I don't know, like 28 out of 30 super cranes that can build ultra high rise buildings have all been in China. Like it's like they're not a communist country, at least not like classical Leninist Marxist communism. Um, but it's the boogie word. It's being talked about all the time. But it's kind of like bringing out the greatest hits. It's like, well, that's easy to get people drummed up and scared about that kind of stuff. It's a little harder to get people all scared and freaked out about woke culture because, like, I don't know, the thought of having to call somebody, they or them instead of he or his, like, okay, maybe that makes me uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. I'm just saying, like, average American middle-aged person. Maybe they're like, we didn't talk about that at all when I was a kid. Okay, so yeah, maybe a little scary, but it's not scary like the Soviets are stockpiling nuclear weapons and they'll stop at no costs until they kill all of us bourgeois pigs. Like they're coming for you and your babies and all of your wealth and they're atheists and want to get rid of religion. And it's like, okay, that seems a lot scarier than, woke agenda stuff. So, yeah, they rigged that bell too, but I feel like it's like, we'll go back to the scary boogeyman. So anyways, Mitch McConnell, he a month ago, he kind of just stopped talking at the podium at a press conference in front of the Capitol building. Like just blanked out, like probably had a stroke. And then today he did it again. Like he was giving another little press conference and just froze and couldn't talk or answer anything and had to get like escorted off and yeah, but he's not gonna retire. Dianne Feinstein is senile and she's in a wheelchair. She's like what? She's like 90, right? 89 maybe. She's really old. And she's given power of attorney to her daughter. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, what are you doing? Like, oh, this is democracy to you, And she's a Democrat. I'm like, this is not a left or right thing. This is like cruddy politicians that just get power hungry and can't let go of it. I mean, it really is pretty remarkable that after 2 terms, Washington was just like, okay, I'm going to retire. You guys vote somebody else in now. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, when you control like half the land in Virginia, then it's like, who's really got the power? And the presidency wasn't nearly what it is today, like in terms of power, but still, that was shocking to people at the time all around the world. People don't let go of power. And letting go of power in this context of North versus South uh, is like the great trauma of our country, right? Like we live with this scar on us still today, even if you've never thought about the Civil War once in your life. The South is still like solidly conservative as a whole, a block, and they care about issues that are different than the rest of the country. Some of them, and a lot of the current political landscape we have right now, we can see it develop right out of the Civil War. That's why I was, a little tongue in cheek, but maybe not totally like, hey, if the South wants to bow out, like, let them. let's give all the like racist people that want to leave California and all the other liberal states and go live in a whites only place, like we'll give you 20 grand to leave. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like when you have to pay a really bad tenant to move out of the house. Like, what? Yeah, all right. Like, we'll give you money. Just do it. Cause, you know, at some point, it's like there's like a deep ideological rift in the country that is only gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. It looked like it was getting better, you know, and then we elected a black president, and then all hell broke loose because that was just, you know, too much, too much. There was a great article that came out in the Atlantic in, I think it was either 2015 or 16 or 17. It's like right when Trump got elected, right after he got elected. And it said the first white president. Even though all other presidents before Obama were white, they did not define themselves by being white and undoing systematically all the things that their black predecessor did. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah, Dwight D. Eisenhower was a white guy for sure. I mean, all of them were. But he lived in a world of extreme white privilege and, you know, male privilege. So he didn't think about it. Like it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like people that have it really good in life, they don't walk around all day sitting like, geez, I wonder what all the poor people are doing. I wonder how they pay their bills. Huh, I wonder what we would like to have bills. You know, like they don't think that way. But in the wake of Obama, like it just supercharged the latent racism that was like boiling right underneath the surface. And like in the 60s, it wasn't boiling under the surface, it was boiling out, right? It's like, oh, you know, a white mob like overturned buses, like Greyhound buses, when they crossed into the South and burnt them because they were carrying black people. And not just because they were carrying black people, like black people were riding in an unsegregated bus, and it was such a threat to the system that you know, they went full violent. But you know, once once legislation's passed in the 60s, right, and there's serious legal recourse for indiscrimination, and the federal government is backing up these changes, we start to see like in the 70s, okay, schools are being integrated in places, right? By the time in the 80s, like when I was born, we didn't think about that at all. It was very like, you know, especially in LA, it's like, you know, we're a multicolored tapestry of people. Like it was into the whatever, I don't know what people were calling it then, but the millennial of it all. And so I think from like the 80s up until Obama is elected in 2008, you've got this like 30-year window where it used to be socially acceptable to be racist. And then it became less so over time because there's still a lot of stuff going on in the 80s, right? It's like, I don't know. I remember the jokes that kids told around the playground. Like, they were horrible. Even at my jobs, like when I first started. Now you'll get fired. But think about this in terms of like the way culture changes. If we go back to when the country was founded, right? You know, say the Mayflower, right? 1620, 1619, 1607, Jamestown. Like, all right, that time period, all the curse words were religious words. It was like hell and damn it and the devil, um, you know, Jesus H Christ. I think they were probably saying the H back then. But then comes the Industrial Revolution right about this time, you know, that we're setting into. And everybody's working in factories and genders are separated, right? They're not working all together on farms anymore, not so much at least. And all of the curse words become body part words, right? Or like sexual words, right? So ass, shit, those aren't bad words if you go back 100 years before that. Ass is in the King James Bible. Like, I don't think shit was ever a bad word in Texas. They just use that like quite freely and literally, but fucking those words are like, oh my God, like if you were a school teacher and you said one of those words, you might get fired, right? But if you got frustrated at somebody and called them stupid little, right? Like, you could do that all day long in the 80s and 90s. Teachers definitely did that. They called kids racial slurs and misogynistic and homophobic. I mean, just this whole gamut of it. Where now you'll definitely get fired for that. But if you dropped a stapler on your toe and you're like, oh shit, no, nobody's going to blink. You're not going to get reported to the office even, right? Like, that's just, wow. That was in like mine and, most of our lifetimes that kind of shift in language has happened. So why did I start talking about cursing? I don't know. It's a fun subject, but yeah. To illustrate, like, so during that transition, like when different curse words are switching over, like you're all of a sudden at risk of losing your job or social standing or relationship or whatever for that. But then come 2016, it's like, oh, all bets are off. Like, Trump has just been caught on tape using some of the most foul, misogynistic, horrible language, certainly that a president's ever been caught saying. And and he got elected despite it. So it's like, what kind of message does that send to people? What kind of message does it send to people when he's like, hey, there's good people on both sides of this fence, anti-racist protesters and neo-Nazis. It's both good people. Like, oh, snap. So like the increase in violent crimes, the increase in hate crimes, the increase in militia groups, in terror organizations, they've all skyrocketed since 2017. So that's kind of a long way of trying to lay out from 1865 to now. You've got a lot of change in the narrative, but the underlying ideological deal is still there. And it's one that we'll see come up in 1930s Germany. It is the stab in the back myth. So one of the reasons people, elected Hitler was because he was a demagogue. He said whatever he thought people wanted to hear. And in a way, Trump is that way. They're both very opinionated and kind of speak their mind, but they're like, they just are tapping into the worst impulses of the crowd and exploiting that. And so, white people that are unemployed and out of work and can't get a job, and it's like, yeah, the immigrants, they are taking your jobs. And that's a simple, easy answer for somebody. And you hear somebody saying that and then say, I'm going to get your job if I get elected. Okay, people are pretty easy that way. Hitler was singing the song of, we got stabbed in the back at the end of the war. Our government defected on us, and then the Jews and communists that took over. They made this deal, the Treaty of Versailles, with France and America and Britain, and Germany got stabbed in the back and betrayed. It was a very compelling narrative for a lot of people because they believed it. Like they felt like, yeah, that is true. Something did go wrong. And for Germany, like some things did go wrong for them. It's just still end of World War I wasn't. The whole war wasn't good for them, but this belief in a conspiracy that they've been betrayed. You know, I mean, this is why you can go to the South and like most of the people, half of the people, still call it the War of Northern Aggression. I'm not joking. I was in Washington, D.C., like, yeah, I bet. Like, it's like you hear those conversations. I mean, if you're a white guy, you hear those conversations. It's like, oh, like people talk freely because they just assume I'm part of the club. No. Like I was in Washington, D.C., I was in a coffee shop. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was just getting a coffee, and there's this like group of 4, I don't know, probably 50s, 60s. They weren't like super old people. They were sitting there having coffee, and they're like, if that goddamn son of a bitch Lincoln hadn't been elected, and they're like, I'm like, bro, that was 150 years ago. Let it go, man. You don't know anybody that was involved in that. Like, nobody does anymore. They've all been dead for a long time. Yeah, maybe you still live in the area, you got ancestors, you know, they tell you the stories or whatever, but like, that stop trying to relive the glory days. I'm gonna pull up, well, before hopping into the syllabus and all the ins and outs of things. Who's seen Gone with the Wind? 1, 2, 3. All right. I mean, it's like one of the most actually, let me just go to HBO because it's in there. Oh shoot, I don't have my passwords installed on this. Okay, never mind. Back to YouTube. Oh well. Until Titanic, it was the best-selling movie of all time. Not only because it was like a huge blockbuster when it came out, but it was re-released pretty much every year until VHS came around in the 80s. Like, I mean, think about that for a minute, right? Not only did you not used to be able to stream stuff that long ago, but it wasn't too long ago. I mean, like 40 years ago, you couldn't go to a video store and rent a movie. Like you had nothing on demand. Like you wanted to see a movie again. Well, the movie theater re-releases movies, every so often. They're always cycling back the, kind of classic ones that people really like. So that they love this one. It'd be shown over and over again. So that's one of the reasons the box office is so high. Oh, it's such a great line. Let's see where this is.
In Barbie Land, everything makes sense. But here in the real world, I'm always like, what is that? What is that? Thankfully, with the Google app, I can search it with Lens.
I love the Barbie movie.
Oh, a chihuahua. What up?
I'd go watch it right now.
Don't you want to marry me?
I am cannot.
But you can't, not if you care for me.
Oh, my dear, why must you make me say things that will hurt you? How can I make you understand? You're so young and unthinking. You don't know what marriage means.
I know I love you and I want to be your wife. You don't love Melanie.
She's like me, Scarlett. She's part of my blood and we understand each other.
They're cousins.
You love me.
The girl that he's talking
How
about.
could I help loving you?
That he's gonna marry.
You who have all the passion for life that I lack. But that kind of love isn't enough to make a successful marriage for two people who are as different as we are.
Why don't you say it, you coward? You're afraid to marry me. You'd rather live with that silly little fool who can't open her mouth except say yes, no, and raise a passel of mealy-mouthed brats just like her.
You mustn't say things like that about Melanie.
Who are you to tell me I mustn't? You led me on. You made me believe you wanted to marry me.
Now, Scarlett, be fair. I never at any time...
You did. It's true you did. I hate you till I die. I can't think of anything bad enough to call you.
the war started.
Sir, you should have made your presence known.
In the middle of that beautiful love scene? That wouldn't have been very tactful, would it? But don't worry. Your secret is safe with me.
Sir, you are no gentleman.
And you, miss, are no lady.
Oh.
But don't think that I hold that against you. Ladies have never held any charm for me.
First you take a low, common advantage of me, then you insult me.
I meant it as a compliment. And I hope to see more of you when you're free of the spell of the elegant Mr. Wilkes. He doesn't strike me as half good enough for a girl of your... what was it? Your passion for living?
How dare you? You aren't fit to wipe his boot.
And you were going to hate him for the rest of your life.
It wasn't the scene I had in mind. Yeah, he was like asleep in there, and they went in and had this like, she kissed him, and they had this argument, and it was it's pretty good. So like, in terms of, I want to see when they declare war. Okay, so this happens. This happens right before.
On chapter 2.
We get it. Back to school is real. But with our gummies, little ones can settle down. You.
Even the kids weed gummies. Let they settle
Very
down.
simple. The Yankees can't fight and we can.
You're right. It won't even be a battle, that's what I think. They'll just turn and run every time.
One Southerner can lick 20 Yankees.
So I will finish him in one battle. Gentlemen can always fight better than rattle.
Yes, gentlemen always fight better than rabble.
And what does the captain of our troop say?
Well, gentlemen, if Georgia fights, I go with her. But like my father, I hope that the Yankees will let us leave the Union in peace.
But Ashley, they've insulted us. You can't mean you don't want war.
Most of the miseries of the world were caused by wars. And when the wars were over, no one ever knew what they were about.
Why, Ashley, if it wasn't...
Just gonna pause that there. Like, this is a beautiful line, right? Most of the miseries of war, you know, like nobody remembers what the wars were about when they started. Yeah, but we remember what the Civil War was about and why it started. You were going across the border into the north and kidnapping black people and saying, you're my slave now, because we passed this Fugitive Slave Law Act. And like the newly elected president was going to put an end to that and like, you know, stop the expansion of slavery. Not abolish it. Like he wasn't gonna, Abraham Lincoln was not gonna abolish slavery. But, you know, he gets elected and they quit the Union. So I just, you know, those are the kind of subtleties that make this movie very insidious, because it's very poetic in passing, and they're like, wait a minute, what? Oh, you're writing this book to try to obfuscate the meaning behind the Civil War. It was a war of states' rights. It was a war of honor and like gentlemen and hush hush with that slavery business now. That doesn't make any of us look good.
No, gentlemen. Mr. Butler's been up north, I hear. Don't you agree with us, Mr. Butler?
I think it's hard winning a war with words, gentlemen.
What do you mean, sir?
I mean, Mr. Hamilton, there's not a cannon factory in the whole South.
What difference does that make, sir, to a gentleman?
I'm afraid it's going to make a great deal of difference to a great many gentlemen, sir.
Are you hinting, Mr. Butler, that the Yankees can lick us?
No, I'm not hinting. I'm saying very plainly that the Yankees are better equipped than we. They've got factories, shipyards, coal mines, and a fleet to bottle up our harbors and starve us to death. All we've got is cotton and slaves and arrogance.
That's treacherous, sir. I refuse to listen to any renegade talk.
I'm sorry if the truth offends you.
Apologies aren't enough, sir. I hear you were turned out of West Point, Mr. Red Butler, and that you aren't receiving a decent family in Charleston, not even your own.
I apologize again for all my shortcomings. Mr. Wilkes, perhaps you won't mind if I walk about and look over your place. I seem to be spoiling everybody's brandy and cigars and dreams of victory.
Well, that's just about what you could expect from somebody like Red Butler.
You did everything but call him out.
He refused to fight.
Not quite that, Charles. He just refused to take advantage of you.
take advantage of me.
Yes, he's one of the best shots in the country, as he's proved a number of times, against steadier hands and cooler heads than yours.
Well, I'll show
No,
you.
no, please, don't go tweaking his nose anymore. You may be needed for more important fighting, Charles. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Butler's our guest. I think I'll just show him around.
So, yeah, and then the South Declares War shortly after that.
And now, ladies and
In terms of like story arc and character development and screenwriting and stage production and acting and directing, it's very good. It's like a masterpiece that way. In terms of history, it's an abysmal, flaming dumpster fire. Like it starts before, right on the eve of the Civil War. And so the first, I don't know, half hour of the movie is just these kind of like beautiful shots of like huge plantations and antebellum dresses and all of that. It's like eye candy. And you see one black person, maybe one or two house servants that are like, they're kind of treated like simpletons, but they're part of the family, and they're, it's all quite nice. And even later on in the movie, you see some of the field hands. She runs into them in Atlanta, because they had been marched out to war, promised their freedom if they fight for the South. And they're just nice and happy to see her and checking on her, and is she okay? And that's it. Like that's all you get in a 3-hour movie about the Civil War set in the South. But then you also get, because the second half of the movie is kind of, it's all leading up to the war and kind of Atlanta burning. And then the second half of the movie is how hard everything is. And she goes back to the plantation, and half of it's burnt down, and, it's Reconstruction. And you see these like arch villains that are like carpetbaggers, like I was explaining about, coming in, and they're the new landlords, and they're appointing all their cronies, and they're also appointing black people to jobs and tasks and government roles now, and it's all corrupt. And look at how the North came down and ruined this beautiful heaven that the Southerners had built for themselves. And that's like the picture of the South in the Civil War that the vast majority of Americans for the second half of the 20th century lived with, because this was like the biggest selling movie. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like German. Yeah, that's a really good point. What was your name again? Andrew. That's a great point, Andrew. Yeah, Germany, it's even a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago now, when Germany won the World Cup, it showed Angela Merkel and like some of her delegates, like, they were celebrating, and like one of them had like a little German, just a regular German flag, not a Nazi flag or anything. He was like waving it, and she's like, I'm like, just no, put that down. We can't do flag waving. We've lost flag waving privileges for life. Like, we don't do big public parades and salutes. There's no rallies. Like, we can't do any of those, because if it even slightly suggests something that looks like the Nazi government, like it's the worst for us. And yeah, like they banned, swastikas and Nazi flags. And still like, we didn't ban the Confederate flag. Yeah, they're different. They mean different things. I'm not trying to, like, they're apples and oranges, but we did handle that Reconstruction part very differently, like very differently. And, like Germany's definitely still has neo-Nazis. Like they definitely had lots of people after the war ended that were like Hitler forever. Like we were robbed of our destiny. Like they didn't think that Hitler was wrong or and for life, those people lived into the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Like some of them are kind of very old, but still alive. But they never reached a point where they could say that. Yeah, it's like they had like a chest in their closet with their. Do you guys ever watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? Oh my God, I can't recommend it because it's just the most base crass show in the world, but it's very funny. And at one point they go to see Dennis. I think it's Dennis's grandfather because he's dying and he thinks that Charlie's Dennis and gives him like his last, will and testament basically. And it's in a chest with his like SS Nazi uniform. They're like, your grandfather was a Nazi. And he kept all of his stuff. It's like that definitely went on. Like people there, I've watched documentaries on like neo-Nazis in Germany. And it's kind of like in America. It's like, well, way backwaters places or in Germany, places that are like way out in the woods, little tiny villages, like, yeah, people kind of do whatever they want out there because the government's not really around. So yeah, they go to a pub and it's like, oh shit, there's a swastika flag up on the wall in there. And like, but I guess like nobody from the federal government's ever coming out here or just don't care. But in America, yeah, because we handled Reconstruction so differently, that between 1865 and 1877, when Reconstruction ends, it is taboo to be pro-Confederate or anything to the contrary. Like the South lost, and they lost like for sure. So, and the federal government had a big presence in all of the states of the South and redivided them into military districts. So they weren't even states proper. And if they wanted to be readmitted into the Union, they had to, form a new legislature that it didn't have any ex-Confederates on it or ex-Confederate leaders. They had to sign an oath to the government. There's a whole bunch of clauses for it. And then they could reapply for statehood, which some of them did, during Reconstruction. That was happening. But when Lincoln is assassinated right at the end of the war, he had changed vice presidents when he ran in 1864 because he didn't think he was going to win, which the war was very unpopular everywhere, right? Like people were not in favor of civil war. And people were dying and the war wasn't going particularly well for the North in 1863. And he didn't think he was going to win. And so he put a Southerner, but from Tennessee, which Tennessee and Kentucky are right on the border, and they stayed in the Union, even though they were slave states. So here's the messed up part. When Abraham Lincoln delivers the Emancipation Proclamation, it only applies to slaves in Southern states. Because the only way the president can like legally do that is to say, we're at war and your slaves are property. They are war contraband. And they're being used in the production of your economy and your weapons and all that stuff. So, we can free them as an act of war against the South. But we can't do that to the slaves in New Jersey. There's still slaves in New Jersey at the eve of the Civil War, even though they got rid of slavery, years before. People still had slaves. And it wasn't until after the war was over and the 13th Amendment gets passed that slavery is abolished everywhere. That the Emancipation Proclamation helped. It led the way for that. But the 13th Amendment passed very narrowly. Like if you're into that and that type of history and those events, Lincoln, the movie Lincoln that came out, oh, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now with Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln is really good. And it shows the whole saga with the 13th Amendment, how it plays out in Congress. And it's kind of the crowning moment of the movie. But Johnson, being a Southerner, he came on the ticket and boosted Lincoln with some of those middling states and whatnot. But he was a Southerner, and he was like ideologically polar opposite from Lincoln, which he's very famous for, like having a kind of board of advisors around him that always disagreed with each other and with him. Like he liked it. He thought that was the way you get to the truth quicker, but it's hard to manage, but it didn't seem to bother him. But then, when Andrew Johnson sits into the presidency, right then and there, everything changes, and he takes a bunch of the restrictions off the South coming into the Union, and he's the first president who's going to be impeached by the House, but it doesn't pass the Senate by one vote. But he's pretty much politically he's kind of toast after that. So the last couple of years of his presidency, he can't get much done. And then General Grant will become president on the Republican ticket after Johnson. And he wasn't a politician, right? He was a general. He was a military guy, West Point and all that jazz. But he wasn't a very good president. Like he wasn't a politician. So he didn't know how Washington worked. He didn't know how to get things done. He'd get jammed up in Congress, and then he was a little inept at his personal life. So he was a drunk, kind of an all the time drunk. He pretty much died of, alcoholism, I think in 1890. And he had a corrupt cabinet that, so his presidency just wasn't good. So you go from Lincoln to Johnson and then Grant, and it's just kind of bad leadership from the top. And then in the election of 1876, that's right, yeah, 76, what happened was what has happened a lot, in recent years, where the GOP wins the what's it called? The college. The Electoral College. Thank you. I'm like, why can't I think of that stupid word? It's such a dumb, we don't need this Electoral College. He'd win that because he'd win districts, right? That's how you win that thing. You win districts. But districts are not all proportionate. And so, you can lose the popular vote, which definitely happened in 2000 with Bush and Al Gore. He won the popular vote. It happened again in 2016 with Trump and Hillary. She definitely won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. That's what's going to happen in 1876. So the deal that is made, it's called the corrupt bargain, where the Democrats say, hey, we'll let you keep the presidency. You won the Electoral College vote, and we'll drop our Supreme Court case against you to win. And you end Reconstruction. So it was two left hands making a handshake. It was a little down and dirty, and that's how they did it. And the Republicans retained control, but basically handed the South over to itself, which didn't work out super great. Not just for Black people, though. It didn't work out great for white Southerners. They are not better off now than they were 100 years ago. They're the poorest part of the country for sure. They're the most obese part of the country. They're lacking railroads and highways and airports and universities and all the things that the rest of the country has in spades. They're behind and stuck behind and can't let go of that past and that stab in the back myth that, hey, you guys were all betrayed and you should have been allowed to succeed because your society was better than the one that conquered you. That's very much alive in the hearts and minds of many Southerners today. Just like, Nazism lived in Germany still today. Because some people don't give up on the nightmare. They're just like, let's keep it going. And I think that's where, so this movie is written out of a book. I want to say Margaret Mitchell writes this book, and it's a bestseller. The book is like, I don't know, it's like over 2,000 pages long. I tried. I was like, I can't. It's longer than the Bible, man. Sure, it's a bestseller though, and so instantly they're going to put it into production and make this movie out of it. And she writes it as like her family's history. Like, this is the story of our family handed down from great-grandfather, because in 1937 or 6, when she was writing this, that's like a couple generations in the past. The Civil War is not super far. Like, there's still war veterans alive in the 1930s, Civil War veterans. So, I mean, for us, it feels just like, like eons, that's so long ago. But it wasn't when this book was written and then the movie was made. And so it's this it's a Southern narrative that becomes the popular history for America. Because whatever history books say, this is much more compelling than reading a history book. It doesn't matter how good the history book is. This is a blockbuster movie. And everybody sees it. I mean, like, the whole country sees this movie. If I would have asked who's seen Gone with the Wind 30 or 40 years ago, almost everybody's seen would have gone up. Even if you didn't pay attention to it, it's like, oh, well, your mom and grandma watch it at Thanksgiving, or it's a movie that was more in the mix of things. Well, like Star Wars today, it's like a lot of people have seen Star Wars but never actually watched it because it's like on at their cousin's house or something. So this idea of the betrayal of the South, this becomes lodged in the popular imagination of Americans. And this is revisionist history. This is going back and saying, hey, the totality of events we don't really like. We don't like the way the story is told, and we don't like the meaning of it. We don't like how it makes us look. So we're going to go back and retell that story, and we're going to repackage some of these facts together, and maybe we'll leave some of them off. Maybe we'll even make a little fiction in there, and of course this is a fictional story, but nonetheless, it's compelling. It can't help but, inform the way you think about things, and the South. And on one hand, that's probably good because then it gives the rest of the country an eye into the world of the Southerner, before, through, and after the Civil War. Like, that could be good, right? If it's helping heal some wounds and okay, this was not all great for you guys. This sucked for you too. But the larger story that it's painting, more than empathy with the other side, is a story of cultural white supremacy and why that was the pinnacle of America, and look at how we've fallen from there. So for Southerners, this is Make America Great Again. It's back to this moment. It's not back to the 50s. That might be for people that live in LA and stuff, right? That's 50s were great. Hardly anybody drove back then, let's go back to that time. That seems nice. But for the South, it's before the war, and that's the quiet part out loud with slavery. Okay, maybe they don't want to enslave people again. But racial hierarchy, yeah, that's going to check a lot of boxes for white folks in the South. I guarantee you. And so I think this kind of idea, though, it's what sparks racism and kind of this toxic element of the way some of us think about our own history and past and the government. And so, for instance, anybody go to Cortell High? What is your mascot? Yeah, it used to be a Confederate fucking soldier. America was in, or California was in the Union. What? Why on earth is a high school in Podunk, California, have a Confederate soldier for its mascot? That's insane. That's crazy. That we are by no means unique in that, though. Like, that's all over the country, not the South, the country. A bunch of the Confederate monuments that people are ripping down, you know, or like are getting the cities to remove and stuff. They're not, they're in like, yeah, they're in like Portland and Montana and like California. Like, why do we got monuments to Confederate generals? Like, oh, because a group of women called the Daughters of the Confederacy started fundraising and going around the country to raise money for, you know, to promote cultural history, aka enshrining the Confederacy and its place in American history around America. Like people were intentionally exporting this idea of, hey, we are the South and we lost, to all white people, you know, outside of like maybe, you know, Yankee Boston and New York. Like, there's probably not a lot of Confederate statues up in there, right? There's definitely no Confederate statues in DC. DC has a bunch of like Union like so many that you're like, oh, you guys were definitely making a point after the war. Like, okay, I read you. Like, do not try us. We will put you down with like intense aggression. Yeah, so you know, when we're reading about like Confederate statues being torn down, I'm a historian. I'm not real. I don't like tearing down old things. Like, I don't care if it's a super old library or department store. I'm like, well, just leave the building there. Like, why are we ripping everything down in California? Confederate statues to Confederate soldiers, you know, I think that is probably a bridge too far to like have a monument to a guy that, you know, tried to kill a bunch of Americans for stopping slavery in a park. That seems not great. I don't know. Do you guys have thoughts on this? The removing of monuments and whatnot? Yeah, Andrew.
At work, I look at a lot of like.
Okay.
And so that leads me to like look into things a lot more. Because I don't know everything.
Right.
Let me look this up, see what plans up. From what I've seen, like most of those statues that were after the Confederate, it's like it's not really a symbol of your heritage. It's like after they lost. Your family didn't live in it. But yeah, I don't.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm with you on that. But it's this idea of like a shared heritage, right? Like, no, it is, and it's a myth though, right? It's like an American myth that is, I think, there for white people for the taking. Like, any white person can go into that myth and instantly feel a little bit better about themselves because that's what that myth tells you. I mean, it's a lie. You're not, right? Like, we're not. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty spread out. Yeah. Is that just because like your family, that was just all in your family, or is that like a branch of your family?
That's my father.
Yeah.
There are a lot of the towns first being and then actually stayed southern and then
Interesting. It's not the typical Italian-American migration journey. Yeah,
My family's, my blood is white skin, but I'm not.
yeah. Well, yeah, but like if there's like a matriarch in the family feeding that poison, it's it's infectious. Like you get poisoned.
He's out here, I put a lot of my family here, but I accept it because they would agree, they wouldn't understand.
Right.
But they don't need it.
Yeah. Well, and I think I mentioned that a couple weeks ago. Like the KKK didn't just hate black people; they hated any queer folk, Jewish people, feminists. Like it was a long list. They are a very hate-filled group. That's out here in the valley. Like we got Klan members.
So now, I'm very spacey. Blind thing. Got a little, 2 foot by 10 foot thing that we can look at it, see all the customers. I made this one skinhead so uncomfortable. I don't out staring at my corner. He's sitting in the corner. That's my waitress gave him back when they told me, hey, I need you to stop staring at this guy at table one. He's really uncomfortable. I'm like, "He's staring."
He thought.
So he was freaking out over it, all guy, all tattooed up.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to cross paths with that guy. But I had a student. It might have been. I think it was like the spring term of 2020 because I think it was the year we went. I was like in the middle of the school year, like we went remote. So we were talking about this and talking about the Klan, and he's like, "Yeah, I saw a Klan meeting," and I'm like. You witnessed one? He's like, yeah, I'm like, because he was Mexican. So I'm all, how'd you do that, bro? Like just wearing a really low hat and glasses. I'm like, and he's like, no, like he lived in Tehachapi. And so he's like, it was the year before, after school, him and his friends would go like up on the ridge line of the hills. And he's like, look down and like, down by like Willow Springs, there's like a group of like 6 or 7 guys in white hoods in the middle of the forest. I'm like, shut up. He's describing to me, I'm like, oh my God, I wish you would have taken a video. He's like, I did. And he like pulls out his phone. I'm like, oh, and he was way up there. You could see it. It's like, that's definitely a Klan meeting. Druids do not keep their sheets that way. Like what else could it be? That's a Klan meeting, but the hoods and everything, just the middle of the forest. That was wild. But yeah, it's alive and well out here. And again, like, why is that out here? Like, we were a part of the Union. The Civil War barely touched California. Like, it's not like we've got, generational baggage from all of that, but people that come from all over the country, we all bring all of our generational baggage with us wherever we're coming from, right? And if enough people from one region land in a spot, then there kind of is a hub that way. I mean, that's how immigration works, right? That's why we've got a Koreatown. That's why we've got little Armenia. But like what we don't see as easily is little Southerner. Like there are little pockets of communities and towns where why do you think there's a bunch of Southern Baptist churches in Southern California? It's not because we're in Southern California. The Southern Baptist is the largest evangelical denomination in America today. The Catholic Church is bigger, but for like Protestants, they're the biggest one. And they're the Southern Baptist convention because they broke from the General Baptist Convention over the issue of slavery. And you can probably guess from the title Southern Baptist which side of the fence they were on, right? So they're on the losing side of the Civil War. And then afterwards they're like, we're sorry, we were wrong on racism and slavery. Well, we were wrong on slavery. They don't really apologize for racism. But like in all of these new suburbs that are popping up, not just in LA, all over the country, right? Southern Baptists would send church planters there to plant a Southern Baptist church. because all the Southerners that were moving there from wherever in the South they were, they know like, hey, I'll go. I mean, they're all church people. The South is very religious, right? So they're going to be looking for a church anyways. And a Southern church, like they have potlucks every Sunday, and it's like fried steak and gravy and mashed potatoes and collard greens and like Southern food. And it's like, well, that's in immigrant groups, that's what you get too, right? You get like, oh, like the food is a big part of it, and just having something that tastes and feels a little bit more like home. It's a little bit more convenient. So like those Southern Baptist churches, most of them had a very Southern ethos, or have. I mean, they're still around.
Like the mission.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a colonialism of sorts, and all the Southerners, because there's a lot of Southerners that moved. I mean, geez, World War II brought so many Southerners, people from all over the country, but definitely from the South to Los Angeles, to Long Beach, to San Francisco and Seattle. Like the war machine brought people from all over the country here. So yeah, Southerners are like binding together, and in those ideological bubbles, these kinds of thoughts are free to go, right? Like I've been in plenty of Southern Baptist church circles where I've heard people say the war of northern aggression. I've heard them say a lot worse too. Because that's okay in that microcosm, right? And it feels like America in general is moving more and more into more microcosms as opposed to like more unity and kind of like shared monoculture. It feels like, yeah. Well, and melting pot is such an interesting term because it applies that like everything will become one, right? Where it's like, all right, well, America's never been that ever from the get-go. And I don't think anybody actually wants that. But, I've heard the other terms are like a mosaic, right? Of, like different pieces making a whole picture together. That's rather beautiful. Also, a tossed salad. It's like, it's a bunch of different ingredients, and you mix them together and then it's all one thing. Or you can leave them all separately, but like cherry tomatoes by themselves are not as fun as in the bowl with everything. So I like that. I like that analogy, I think. Yeah, so the this period of Reconstruction, I think it's hard for us to think about because it's hard to imagine like the country actually being ripped apart by physical fighting and civil war, especially along regional lines, right? Like if there's a civil war in America today, it's not going to be like one area versus another. Like it's like every little area, it'll be all the people at Walmart, just the parking lot, like killing each other. Like at all the Walmarts everywhere. And coming soon to a Walmart near you. Like statehood massacre. Like it'll be ugly if it happens. Also, though, I think it'll be shut down real quick because, like all the blowhards of the AR-15s are like, and you're not gonna do shit against a drone. Like, get your automatic weapon. The government's got tanks. Like, they have F-35s and space laser beams. It's like any gun you could have isn't going to do anything to the government. Like the thought of like overthrowing the government by physical violent means, it's like it's laughable. It's ridiculous. You could do it from within the military, like if you were a general and you plotted a coup for like years and years and years and did a like Order 66 on everybody and just went that way. But like regular people, no. So okay. That's kind of like the big view of this at a political level. let's take like a 10-minute break, and we'll come back in and then look at just some of all the other things going on in this window we're calling Reconstruction of innovations and changes. So let's do 7:25. All right. Well, let's hopefully you guys got a chance to go through some of this material on your own. Things that stood out to you here or in the book. Yeah, or anything you want to talk about. What about this? 1866. So it's the year after the wars ended, and the first like successful, because there'd been quite a few attempts. So the first successful submarine telegraph line is laid between Canada and the United States and Great Britain and Ireland. Connecting the continents, essentially instantaneous. Again, that's so far past, and we're so interconnected that it's hard to like really wrap our minds around. Man, people used to have to wait days and days to just get news. Like, that's crazy. Like there was no such thing as like global news. Like, things weren't globally reported the way they are today. And then here's this like wild innovation that changes that for Americans. Especially because like London's I'm pretty sure at this point, like mid 19th century, London's the biggest city in the world. And it's economically the most significant city in the world. So it's connecting New York and then DC to kind of the epicenter of global news, really, because at this point too, England's empire spans the world. So they're good at laying telegraph lines through Africa and India and across Asia. Let's see, let's go down here a minute. Might be in the next section. I think it's 1878. There it is, 1883. The Krakatoa volcanic explosion. So this is one of the first like events that's happening on the other side of the world that Americans learn about in virtually real time. It's like a few hours delay, but that as opposed to a few days, that's pretty instantaneous. Oh, we don't have to watch this whole thing. It's interesting to watch. Basically, an island in like South Indonesia, like the whole island like exploded. Like it was just gone. It wasn't there anymore. And it sent so much smoke into the air and caused tsunamis, all over the Pacific, killing lots and lots of people in the process. The explosion was so loud that it could be heard 3,000 miles away. It's like a bomb going off in DC and we hear it here. That's crazy. I can't even fathom like just how loud that is. But it also caused a little mini ice age because it sent so much soot and carbon into the air. It formed, huge cloud masses that kind of roamed around the earth for a couple years afterwards. This event then led everybody to look at a volcanic explosion that happened, I think, in 1820. I might be off on that. It's the early 1800s. And it also caused a little micro ice age that inspired a bunch of European writers to get together and challenge each other to write dark tales because the weather had been so dark for over a year. And that's when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. Yeah, nobody back then had any idea it was caused from a volcano on the other side of the planet. But until we've got this kind of technology to help us communicate in real time, nobody think about things in those kinds of connectivity. Likewise, if we think about travel, in 1869, the Transnational Railroad is completed, this line right here. And this is where in Utah is where the two rail lines join. Hell on High Wheels. Yeah, that's the name of the show. It's an AMC show. It finished a few years ago. It's really great. And it's about this and the building of the railroads and all the drama and stuff that went on it. But now that people can travel faster than natural animals, right? Like horses can get you going a little bit faster than humans can run. They certainly can pull more cargo and whatnot, but then they're usually going slower than humans can run. So, the fastest people are going before this are, I don't know, 25 miles an hour, right? 30 miles an hour. It's not 60, it's not 80, and it's individualized. It's not on tracks that are also running other railroads. So logistically, like the things that we start building in turn are changing us. And this is true of all technology, right? So we make railroads and they totally change how we think about time. Time used to be very centered to you and it used to be very local. How did you know the time? Well, you had a big clock in your house if you were wealthy enough to have one. And then there was always one in the town square in the church, and the church bells rang when it was service time or somebody died or something. And the factory whistle to let everybody know to hightail it into work. Shift starting in 5 minutes, right? It doesn't matter what a city 400 miles away, what time they're on, they're just on their own time. As long as everybody's working on their idealized gathered version of time, it doesn't really matter. The telegraphs start changing that and trains really change that. So we'll watch this short TEDx.
The development and spread of railroads across the United States brought a wave of changes to American life. During the railroad boom, thousands of jobs were created, new towns were born, trade increased, transportation was faster, and the overall landscape of the nation transformed. But perhaps the most interesting change of all is the least known, the establishment of standard time. Today, we know that if it is 6:28 a.m. in Los Angeles, it is 9:28 a.m. in New York, 2:28 p.m. in London, 5:28 p.m. in Moscow, and 10:28 p.m. in Tokyo. No matter where you are, the minute and second are the exact same. But before the railroads, there was no need for a national or global clock, and each town kept its own local time. So when it was 12 noon in Chicago, it was 12:07 p.m. in Indianapolis, 11:50 a.m. in St. Louis, and 11:27 a.m. in Omaha. This worked just fine when the only modes of travel were horses or steamboats, but it became incredibly problematic when railroads came along. How can you keep a train schedule when each town has its own time? And how do you prevent collisions or accidents on the tracks if train conductors are using different clocks? It doesn't really make sense to leave a station at 12:14 p.m. travel for 22 minutes, and arrive at 12:31 p.m. In order to eliminate that confusion, the railroads of the United States and Canada instituted standard time zones on November 18, 1883 at noon. It allowed the railroad companies to operate more effectively and reduce deadly accidents. The American public, however, was not so quick to embrace this new change, as many cities continued to use their own local time. Resistance was so strong that in some towns, clocks would show both the local time and the railway time. Imagine this conversation. "Pardon me, sir, do you have the time?" "Why, yes. Which do you need?" "It is 12:13 local time and 12:16 railway time." Ultimately, the logic of keeping a standard time prevailed, and the United States government made time zones a matter of law with the Standard Time Act on March 19, 1918. Since then, there have been numerous changes to the time zones, but the concept of standard time has remained. But the United States was actually not the first to develop standard time. The first company to implement the use of standard time was the Great Western Railway in 1840 in Britain, and by 1847, most British railways were using Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT. The British government made it official on August 2, 1880, with the Statutes or Definition of Time Act. But while Britain may have been the first to establish standard time, it is Asia and the islands of the South Pacific that enjoy the first hour of each new day. The International Date Line passes through the Pacific Ocean on the opposite side of the Earth from the prime meridian in Greenwich where, thanks to trains, standard time was first used. Trains have evolved over the years and remain a prominent form of transportation and trade throughout the world. And from the New York City subways to the freight trains traveling across the Great Plains to the trolleys in San Francisco, they all know exactly what time it is. And thanks to them, we do too.
It might seem like a small thing, but think about how significant that is, like how we think about time. I mean, for you and me, we're used to thinking of it minutes and seconds and about precision, and you set an alarm on your phone and you've got to be on a Zoom meeting with somebody else on the other side of the country, at a set certain time, which is really good for efficiency, but is maybe not so great for like autonomy and individualization, right? Like the transcendentalists like Henry David Thoreau and Emerson, they wrote a lot during this period and before the war about the changes that were happening in society from all the mechanization and all the machinery and kind of the robotic nature that humans were being forced to live in with increase, which I mean, if they compare it to today, geez, they didn't know what they were talking about. They had it good. They didn't have any internet or phones or, ads going on everywhere. We're very much in this like robotiness kind of state of living, and people said, this is not good for humans. Like we're not meant to live in such like rigidity, which I don't know. I kind of agree with them. I'm like, I don't think we are either. But yet I'm stuck here living in 2023, so I can't really do much about that except, turn into a crazy person and move into a log cabin in the woods. Like there's always that option, but that doesn't sound very appealing to me. I don't want that. We have timepieces with us everywhere we go, all the time. I read a really interesting article maybe 10 years ago, and it was saying, I think the title of the article was "When We Become Cameras." And essentially it was saying like, look, time is such an integral part of our lives. It's in our thinking. Like we think with a clock now. People didn't used to think like that. If you wanted to meet somebody, you'd be like, when should we meet? How about at noon? Because that's when the sun's highest. So you can kind of figure like, all right, it's right there. I should start walking and I'll probably meet him when it's that, like, that's it. Or sunrise or sundown. You're not like, hell, let's meet at 3:30 for coffee. Or when the hell's 3:30? Like, you don't have a watch. you don't really think about the day that way. You think about it maybe in terms of tasks and what you have to do, but you're not really thinking of those in terms of hours and minutes. So time is just such an internal part of us now. This author was saying, oh, cameras and images are that. Like we are becoming that. We can't think apart from our cameras, which I think is true now, or we're in the stages of that becoming true. That was a bold thing to say 10 years ago, though. Like the smartphone is only what, 14 years old? You know, like, yeah, there were cameras on phones before that, but they sucked. Like they were so bad. Even the first iPhone camera was pretty crappy. It was 1 megapixel. Like, oh my God, it looked so good compared to all the other crappy cell phone pictures. So it wasn't like up until I got a smartphone, I definitely had a camera, even a digital camera, because it's like, I'm not gonna take pictures of my phone. I want a good picture. Now this takes way better photos than any camera I ever owned in my whole life. Like, and video, shooting in 4K these days. Oh my gosh, like that's wild. And just like recording it or live streaming it, sending it to people, you know, like if somebody's telling you a crazy story, they're like, I'm at this place and you'll never, like if they're not sending you pictures, you're like, what's wrong with you? Give me a picture. Come on, right now. Like we kind of think in those terms. It's just weird because that's one of those big technological changes that's happening in our lifetime. Kind of the way this happened to people, you know, in over their lifetime. This transition into like linear, time-driven living and thinking. Any thoughts on that? Well, here's another example of something that's like adjacent to that, related but different. 1873, Levi Strauss patents riveted jeans, you know, like Levi jeans. I bet there's at least 5 or 10 people in here wearing Levi. Half the time I'm wearing Levi jeans. I mean, they're about as classic American as Coca-Cola and baseball. You know, it's like this is Mickey Mouse. You know, it's like they're in the pantheon of like American goods that we identify ourselves by. That foreigners identify America by. Like, you know, like I remember it was a big thing, like in the 90s at least, like people coming over, if they're on vacation, they're like, gotta go to a Levi's outlet. They just buy like a shit ton of jeans. They'd take them back and sell them wherever they were, because you know they just didn't have them or have as plenty of them as we do here, and they're not as cheap. This is a pivotal moment for America, but it's also like kind of stands in for all mass-produced things, which, okay, it's one thing if you're getting like a mass-produced razor blade, right? All right, efficient, but still a razor blade's a razor blade, whatever. But clothing's a little different because it comes in sizes, right? Like we measure ourselves in inches sometimes. Ladies, I don't even know what the hell's going on with how the mysterious magic that they label women's clothing sizes on. It seems like it's on the hunch of like a troll in a room. They're like, I deem this a 7. It's like, what's the standard of like, what's a 7 and a 6 and an 8? It changes, and it changes by branding. And it's like, it's a stupid way to measure clothing for sure. But also small, medium, large isn't great either. You know, like that's not always working, you know, like even for guys, it's like, well, all right, like maybe I'm not very big, but I'm fat. Maybe I've got super big shoulders, but I'm skinny. I don't know, you know, like body shapes are different for everybody, but our clothing is not, unless you are super wealthy and you're getting your shit tailored, right? Like this is just kind of one of those boxes that we're conformed into. You got time, you've got like standardized sizes. In a few of these Satori boards, I think it's like 1899 or 1900. I've got a thing in there, and it's in the textbook about Campbell's soup, right? Like they are the first people to really like market and sell condensed like soup, pre-made soup. That's how all of us think about soup. It's in a can. That's not like soup is one of the oldest things that people have made anywhere. Like that's one of the oldest meals, right? And it's usually coming from like a bone broth, which takes like hours and hours and hours and hours to make. Yeah, exactly. Like it's like kitchen time for sure. And there's an art and a craft that goes into that. But like, hey, guess what? You're replaced. Can, boom. It's people appreciate that. It's an instant meal. It's quick. But there's something disruptive about it as well, especially for women, in 1900. Like the men were not cooking a lot in 1900. Women, that was the woman's job in a family unit. And so like you're kind of displaced by that. Like, hey, you're replaceable. We can do instant food and we don't really need your skills anymore. That's like disturbing, threatening, disruptive to society. And it's taking place when all the suffragette stuff is happening. So it all looks very tame to our eyes, but it's like in its setting, it's quite radical. The changes that are happening with genders, even. All right, let's watch this. This is on wealth distribution in America, and I think this video's, I think it's like 10 years old now too. So just be assured that the numbers you're seeing have only increased in terms of inequality since the video's been made, for sure.
Was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, Here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
I feel depressed every time I watch that. I'm going to start leaving the room in future classes. It's like, all right, trigger warning. I can't anymore.
I'll be back.
Yeah, exactly. What's that? Yeah, I just am like, this is, it's criminal. And like, whatever we think about the framers of the Constitution and the people fighting the American Revolutionary War, one of the things that they did seem to think was like, hey, like psychotic amounts of wealth in one person or one family is a threat to like freedom and liberty and democracy. Yeah.
So one thing I noticed, especially last week when we were watching the debate, was a lack of talking about certain topics, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Wealth inequality, nor did they talk about, a lot of things going on with workers' rights,
Right.
rights going on.
Yeah.
Like the trend was very much to not talk about it and not that issue of money saved, it doesn't really go.
Yeah, for sure. They like Amazon warehouse workers peeing in bottles.
Well, it kind of goes back to what we're seeing right now, like how sad it is. We're about to try to go through this whole overturn of getting rid of, fossil fuels and oils and all for the better of the environment. Lower, but wait, who's in bed with all the production of cobalt? That,
It's China.
China, and then we've got Biden's son who's working with them and trying.
Oh, yeah.
And then you look and you're like, okay, so we're trying to pass these laws, and we're trying to not, dig more oil, and we're all, having to struggle all as low men because we can barely afford freaking gas in the whoopsie car we have as it is. And yet they're like, oh yeah, buy a, $50,000 Tesla and put a power station at your house so that way you don't have to go to a charging station.
And pray your garage doesn't catch on fire.
And exactly. And so it's like, oh, interesting, great. Another thing for you guys to get rich while the rest of us try to figure out how we're just supposed to get by.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a valid point there. Like the electric cars, electric devices in general, our smartphones and all the batteries. It's like, well, they're all from precious, rare earth metals that are not in America. At least not a lot in America. They're in Africa and China and Kazakhstan. And yeah, like the cobalt mines in South Africa are like, it's like a world crisis situation right now. Like, hold on, I'm gonna pull up a video because it's shocking. Mines, oops.
To Golden Gate Bridge and capture some amazing photos.
Oh yeah, definitely. We should go there.
These stones have become crucial to our way of life. They are called cobalt, essential in green technologies from electric cars to rechargeable batteries. But while its stock price is predicted to soar, there are minerals that are worth billions of dollars. The people who live and work here are paying a heavy price.
This is acid.
Acid?
Yeah. Siku ndimuzala badadangu. Mtoto kanyuyu.
Above, Emmanuel clambers down what looks like an endless dark tunnel. In fact, Emmanuel descends for ages as the mine never seems to end.
itawa unanene tufuata mule we mushibambe tena kunkamba kama usema sasa na kuvinya kushukona una bloke kwanza.
These men do this every day. These young men do this every day. So for them, it's a day job, but it's a very risky job. It's a very, very risky job because imagine going deep underground in darkness and just digging for something. This could collapse at any moment.
And they do collapse. I mean, this is the problem of mining since people have been mining stuff since, antiquity, right? Like it's cobalt today. It was copper, 500 years ago. It's silver. It's like we need these things. Like they do help our societies function, but there's the cost, and miners are always the most endangered part of a society. And for our history too, we'll see. I don't have as much as I'd like in the book, but I definitely have some sections on miners and miners' rights, and especially like the progressive era when like worker safety becomes more of a nationwide attention issue. Miners' rights are in there as well. And it's gotten better in America, but you know, working a coal mine in West Virginia is still like a horrible, hazardous job. Like it's not a job anybody wants. So yeah, I mean, this is like we want renewable energy, but this is how we get it. So I don't know. I've got no solution though. You know, that's the problem. It's like, well, let's keep using gas. That seems like a good idea. No, that sucks too. I don't know because we're going to run out of cobalt at one point as well. You know.
Well, there's a man that made a machine working hard at water.
I've heard about that. I've heard about that. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the.
There's no finance. That's why it'll never be, big pharma can't get behind that. Government's not going to get behind that. So that would be essentially coming up with a solution that would allow us to be able to travel in a much more cheap, efficient manner, a greener manner. There's no money in it.
Yeah.
Why would they want to do that? They're not really wanting to go green. They're wanting to go green in the sense of dollar bill. That's really what it's about.
That's why I actually see a lot of articles about coming up with trying to get back into turning coal-based power plants into nuclear fission plants that are not wasteless, but are a lot less wasteful than normal nuclear we're used to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, nuclear energy, it sounds scary. There's Chernobyl, there's the 3 Mile Island incident, right? But it's safe. I mean, so okay, so there's been a couple of accidents. Well, Fukushima was pretty bad. That was bad, but they're dumbass faults for building a nuclear power plant like on the coastline of the Ring of Fire. Like, did nobody think, hey, you know what? There might be a giant earthquake in Japan because those never happen there. Like, I don't know. Just sometimes people, I'm like, like it's safer. It's definitely cleaner. And like the amount of energy that it can produce compared to like windmills and solar panels and all that stuff, it's like way more output. And like historically, like human society, when we experience energy revolutions, we thrive, like we do well and grow, and there's not as much of a lack of resources and things aren't as scarce, so war is less frequent. But yeah, why aren't we tapping into that? I don't know. Good questions though. I was never into Star Trek like when I was younger. And then a couple of years ago, I'm like, I think I'll watch the original series because I like weird 60s stuff anyways. So I'm like, all right, cool. Oh, this is pretty good actually. Like I like it. And I watched the Next Generation. I haven't really gone past that. I'm not like super into Star Trek. But what I do really like about it is the vision of the future that it puts forward. It's like a very like proactive, positive vision of the future. But it's one where, yeah, like we can have all those great things, but we got to kill materialism. Like we have to kill like private wealth, like that. Like people have whatever they want in that society. And guess what? Most of us, we don't want millions of things. Like we're actually pretty content with just the regular things. And of course, it's also a world where like they've resolved, race-based conflict for the most part. Gender equality is achieved. It's like a very ideal vision of what society could look like. Yeah, when I started reading into Gene Roddenberry and stuff, that's when I was like, oh, okay, cool, man, you're what's up, dude. You were playing a game, like, because he was trying to like show all of these faults in our society that we don't even think of as faults, like unfettered capitalism, just pure greed and materialism, aestheticism. It's like, no, those are bad. Like we're kind of like, hey, good for them, they got it. Hey, look at what they got. It's like, yeah, that's not going to produce a better society, that's for sure. This is, I put that video in here because this is the era after the Civil War that we get millionaires. And the first like millionaire, the first billionaire in the world will be John D. Rockefeller, and it's oil, right? He buys up all of the oil refining plants in the country, almost all of them. He has a 90% control on the oil market in America. So yeah, there's different gas companies and oil companies and stuff, but they all got to get processed through him. So I mean, he makes ungodly amounts of money. JP Morgan, he's like a banker financier. He'll be right up there with Rockefeller. At one point, they said he controlled like 40 or 45% of the economy indirectly, just through the boards and companies he was on and owned and had stocks in. And Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the shipping magnate. Did I see a hand back there? He's just stretching. Are you good? All right. Yeah, Cornelius Vanderbilt makes a boatload of money off of shipping. There's a good handful of these people. They call them robber barons because also what's kind of unbelievable in this time period, there's no corporate tax and there's no income tax. So they're making billions of dollars tax-free, just total, because people weren't used, like the majority of people weren't making money from doing a job. They were farmers, and wealthy people, all their money, it wasn't in banks and it wasn't getting a huge annual salary with a big bonus. It was all in property. So the government taxed property. It's a pretty straightforward way to tax things. But society is changing, and our laws don't change quick enough. Our laws never change quick enough to keep pace with society. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the problems.
I think it was Roosevelt who started with the like antitrust laws in the US.
Yes. That's like 1903, 1904. So, I mean, it's like 50 years. Yeah, it's like a 50-year window from the end of the Civil War to when Roosevelt finally starts busting up monopolies and trusts. So, yeah, I mean, this is the age of the robber baron. So this is the age where wealth inequality grows significantly. It will, like mid 20th century, that gap actually kind of from the early 20th century up through the 70s, the gap shrinks, it's narrowing, and the middle class grows the most during this time. But then Reaganomics hits, and then it's we're removing all restrictions off the wealthy, deregulate everything, and that's why we're in the spot we're in today with wealth inequality. And this is not an issue that was just facing Americans. Pretty much everywhere in Europe, they were experiencing industrialization as well at different speeds. In 1867, Germany and Britain and Italy and France and Belgium and the Netherlands, they're all probably further along than America is in terms of industrialization. And so Europe's been kind of struggling with this transition from farmer life to city, working in factory, having occupations and jobs kind of life. And it's brutal. It's a really hard transition for societies to make. People are getting spit out of the machine in the middle of all of this. And, a lot of people are trying to ask questions about society and money and wealth and the future, right? Like, what is the future? Like, everything's changing so quick. What does it mean? So communism it was not like Karl Marx did not invent communism. Communism as an idea has been around for a very, very, very long time. It's like people living in commune together and pooling resources and sharing together and kind of collectively making decisions. And so before the Civil War, there was something like, I don't know, it was over 2,000 communes had been, you know, in the years from like 1820 to 1860. There had been 2,000 communities started. Most of them collapsed at some point because, you know, that's usually what happens with communes. Even if it starts really good, they usually get weird sex stuff pretty quick. Like that's just the reality. Like a lot communes in like the 1800s were like, yeah, so we've got communal property and communal marriages, and we're all just married to each other, and like we'll all raise each other's kids and like eat quinoa, and you know, like it's like, yeah, there were hippies back then too. Like there are people like, yeah, let's drop out of society, man. And you know, most of them got very weird. There were other ones that like prohibited sex completely, and they died out naturally because they never had any children. So, and that's a hard sell to join. You know, all right, you're gonna have better luck signing people up for the sex commune than the sexless commune. I just on a marketing level, you know. You'll definitely get your incels showing up for the sexless commune. So Marx, you know, the idea of communism, it's not unique to him, but Marxism is his brand of communism, and it's a very thoroughly fleshed out idea of what communism for an entire society would look like and how it would function. If you've listened to like conservative talk radio or, you know, your crazy uncle at a barbecue, you might think that Karl Marx is some like whack nut job. He was not. He was one of the smartest people alive in the 19th century. And for sure, the most well-read person on the subject of economics who had ever lived until his death. You know, like people have surpassed that now, I'm sure. But he traveled Europe to go to different libraries to read economic theory and really understand economies, and not just, you know, talking like kind of philosophical terms, but get into real math and science terms of economics. He really invented the modern field of economics. It's largely because of him that's like became such a field of study. And communism doesn't take root, Marxism doesn't take root in his lifetime. But after he's dead, you know, Russia, it takes place in Russia, which he never would have guessed in a million years. I mean, he said like, oh, when this happens, it'll happen in Germany, maybe the UK or America. Like, you know, maybe Italy, but Italy doesn't have a strong enough history of democracy and capitalism. That's the thing. Marx is not against capitalism. He's like, it's a prerequisite. You have to have a firm, like strong capitalist society before you can do socialism and then communism. Like they were steps, and they're not like antithetical. They build off of each other. He was an idiot and assumed, look, people in a highly capitalized society will also all become highly educated, and they will all value this together. You know, like that did not happen. And Russia they weren't capitalist at all, and they had no history of democracy whatsoever. I mean, they were ruled by a czar. They had slaves long after the Civil War was over. Like they didn't abolish serfdom till like the 1890s, I think. Communism then instantly gets very distorted and weird. So the kind of manifestation of Marxist communism in the world is a very like perverted version of it that is more Russian than Marx. So we'll watch this short video on the difference between communism and socialism, because I don't know how important these terms are going to be for our future. Marxism is dead. Like somebody that's trying to implement Marxism and have this communism, that ship has sailed. Like we're past that ideologically. There's also a ton of baggage associated with all that. And the economies don't work the way they worked when Marx is writing this 150 years ago. Not even remotely close. Money doesn't work the same way it does. Our banking systems everything's different. So I don't know genuinely how important this is for our futures. It will be to, sort out the rhetoric of people trying to weaponize words like socialism. We live in a socialist country, you guys. You're going to retire and get Social Security. Like, this is a government payout program that redistributes wealth, okay? It's just a crappy version of socialism. Like, yeah, it's like these are not, neither one of them should be scary words, but you can understand why communism would be terrifying to the elite. The top 20%, that communism's like, yo, we're coming for your carrot. And if you don't give it to us, we're gonna chop your head off. And communists did that in some countries. Like the American wealthy, left or right, they don't want this at all. That's why also, I don't know that you're going to hear a lot about wealth inequality on a Democratic stage either. That's like, well, money runs all of that. And you have to, it costs so much money to even remotely contend in any of those corners that maybe it'll happen one day, but it'll take a unique individual, probably like an independently wealthy person who doesn't care about losing their wealth. That doesn't seem to exist, but if we got somebody like that and they got into politics, maybe that conversation would happen in earnest, but it's not going to happen with the liberals either because they're, money hungry as well.
This might come as a surprise, but in the history...
The second half of that thought, though, was while this might not be super important for our future conversations in our lifetime, it's super important for our conversations in this class, because from that point on until, 1992 at least, but it's still in our political conversations. This is the dominating ideology more than anything else. It's communism and capitalism. And this is what the Cold War is about. So yeah, this is a subject you gotta wrap your mind around. And I'd encourage you, there's so many good videos like this out there. 1 Minute Economics is a great YouTube page where they do economic ideas and things in 1 minute. So it's all right, they're really good at breaking down just different items very simply. So if you're wrestling with this, I'd say just do a little bit of a deeper dive. Go into a few more things on
history of the modern world, there has never been a communist country. While a number of countries have described themselves as communist, for example, China and North Korea, by definition, there has never been a true communist country. So what exactly is communism and how does it relate to socialism? Well, it may be easier to explain what the two have in common. Both ideologies originate from a desire to limit worker exploitation and lower or eliminate the influence of economic classes in society. There are dozens of variations on both communism and socialism based on the different ways these ideologies are implemented in different countries. There's Stalinism, Leninism, Trotskyism, Maoism, and others which are essentially all versions of Marxism, coupled with various styles of revolution. Karl Marx was an economist and philosopher who co-wrote the Communist Manifesto, among other foundational books on communism. In short, his theory centered around the idea that as Europe transitioned from centralized monarchies to quasi-democratic capitalist economies, workers were being exploited by those who owned the means of production. So if you work in a factory or on a farm, as many at the time did, whoever owns the factory or farm is getting more out of the worker than they're putting in. This creates an inherent inequality, giving the owners, who Marx called the bourgeoisie, power over the workers, called the proletariat. In Marxism, to fix this inequality, society must shift towards a model where the proletariat hold this power instead, by collectively controlling the means of production. That's where socialism and communism come into play. According to Marx, socialism is a precursor to communism and the next logical step after capitalism. In socialism, a democratic state controls the means of production, rather than having private companies hold ownership. Instead of competing with each other as in a capitalist society, socialism has workers contribute as much as they can to the greater good, and then they all share equally in that good. Variations of this idea are already popular within capitalist societies in the form of universal healthcare or social services like fire departments and schools funded by taxes. While the use of these services is unequal, everyone is equally responsible for contributing to them based on their ability or level of income. So that's socialism. But once the state controls all the means of production, the next step is total collective ownership, not just of production, but all aspects of society and economy, including private property. The intention of abolishing private property is a classless, moneyless, and stateless society, where everyone works towards the same collective goal of being healthy, happy, and free. Everybody does what they can to contribute and takes only what they need in return. As I said before, there are no true communist countries, and there never have been. Every so-called communist country is actually a socialist country, with the state controlling employment and economy to some degree. Even the widely referred to Communist Russia was actually called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. In short, socialism and communism are not altogether different. Rather, most schools of economics consider socialism to be a precursor to communism once the state has enough control over society and economy. But this total control is a major reason that socialist countries struggle to reach this ideal. Corruption is rampant in countries like the former USSR, Venezuela, Vietnam, and North Korea, largely due to people in power abusing that power instead of using it to help the society they control, and refusing to give up that power to the people. Nonetheless, socialist ideals have seen incredible success when paired with capitalism in countries like Sweden and Canada. The human hurdle of overcoming power and greed in government is the biggest reason we've never seen a true communist country. So, which countries have been labeled communist, and how do they actually live up to their reputations? Find out in the
Yeah, like poor Marx, he made the mistake of like putting trust in people. He thought like, oh, well, we'll get rid of the super rich and then everybody will be good and we'll make good decisions together. Oh, there's a bunch of cronies waiting to take their place. Like, you could kill all the rich. There's going to be other people that get in there and weasel their way into powerful positions. Yeah, and they pay like 50% tax. It's crazy high. But you know what? Like, well, I mean, I don't know. You guys probably are paying a lot of taxes if you're in college, but regular, like, lower income, middle income people, it's going to be like 25%. It could be 30. If you go up a little bit and you get into like the over 100K bracket, it's going to be a bit higher too. The super wealthy pay almost nothing in taxes, meanwhile. And their corporations, Amazon paid zero in taxes. Yeah, like in federal tax, like they didn't pay any profit taxes at all. Like, why? It's the biggest company in the world. Like, why are they getting a break? What? Yeah, like that, and that's the thing. And Walmart's the same way. It's like, oh, the Walton children, I think collectively they're like the richest person in the world. Like Sam Walton was the richest guy in the world when he died. And then his snot-nosed, miserable children, fought and bickered over, splitting up the assets. But together, collectively, like they're beating out Musk, right? Walmart employees make up the single largest block group of people working that take state aid. So like we're paying for poor people, we're subsidizing them because they can't afford to live on what they're making, while the owners of the means of production are the wealthiest people in the world. And everybody else is supposed to pay for their mistreatment of their own employees. It's insane. It's a crazy system. It's like, that's nuts. That's not good. I don't care if you're left or right. That's stupid. That's unsustainable too. Like, it's gonna crack if we, and you know, like the big conglomerates like Walmart and Amazon, and you know, there's just more of those in the future. Those things are not gonna, unless there's a new Theodore Roosevelt somewhere, those things are not gonna get broken up. And so like, well, where's the tipping point on that? I don't know. Like, homelessness has risen to absolutely historic rates, right? Like, if these trends keep happening, yeah, there might be like mobs storming the rich people's houses to, you know, chop their heads off.
Adding to that, in my poli-sci class, we talked about the next things that are going to be showing up on the ballot. One of them is, it's like allowing fast food workers to unionize, or at least a specific section of them.
Yeah.
Unionize.
I know, because Starbucks workers have been trying to do that, and it's been a thing. Yeah. Nice.
I had something else. I'm interested in how that will go. Obviously, the higher up people are owning these companies. Okay, say the ballot gets passed and they fight for higher wages. What does that first of all show for the people who've been there? Because that was one thing I personally kind of saw with the whole raise in the wage. We're at a minimum wage that's long overdue for an adjustment to be sort of competitive enough for us to be able to survive on that pay.
I think I know what one of their answers might be. I saw this earlier this year. A humanless McDonald's. There's no people at it. It's friggin' robots. I mean, part of me, if you would show this to me at like 10 years old, awesome. Like, yeah, man, robots rule the world. Now as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, we're living in a dystopia. It's just so weird. I'll never forget, I think it was the robots. It's like all robotic, like, it was probably like last year. I was in West Hollywood walking somewhere, and I'm like, just one of those delivery robots just driving down the sidewalk. I'm like, you're unchaperoned. You can't be out by yourself. What? Go home, man. What are you? It's dark out here. Like, we will never see those in the Antelope Valley. People would do such horrible things to them, defile those food service robots in unimaginable ways.
Oh yeah, true.
No. Really? It's lasted that long. I wonder how many times it's been repaired for bullet holes. Shoot a drone up. I also thought that when they were talking about Amazon doing like the sky drone deliveries, I'm like, not out here. People got too many guns. Shoot those things out of the sky. Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, it's I mean, it's such a weird time. Like, we are really living in this world of like automation. And here's the thing. If McDonald's can make a restaurant that's completely automated and robots are doing everything, and the food still tastes like mediocre McDonald's, right? It's not like McDonald's is In-N-Out, okay? It's like, it kind of tastes like robots are putting it together anyways. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, well, if they can do that, and like all the people working there can go find equally or better paying jobs, cool, like that's fine. I actually don't care. That doesn't bother me. less chance that a robot's gonna spit in my hamburger because I was rude to it.
Yeah.
You know? Come on now. That happens. You know that.
You say that, and I was just reading an article the other day talking about how they're not able to reverse the knowledge that they're finding that the AI has. So if we're saying that AI is capable of continuous learning, aren't we just going right down the path of every sci-fi film of, AI domination? And so all we're doing is, I literally look at everything going on, like we're somewhere between doomsday of AI and somewhere between Wall-E, where we're just, on conveyor belt being that people of non-health, and they're utilizing us for whatever services that our bodies can provide us, whether that's, stem cell research or whatever, and here we are going, okay.
Oh, this is not the one I saw. I saw something like yesterday. Let's see if I can find it. This is the one I saw. Okay. Futuristic movie timelines. Okay, so Clockwork Orange, that was in the 90s. RoboCop, I guess, was in 2015, same year as Back to the Future 2. Still waiting on my flying DeLorean. Blade Runner, well, we already passed Blade Runner. We've passed the year of Soylent Green. Soylent Green is a classic Charlton Heston movie. We're not at Children of Men yet. V for Vendetta. Minority Report's not that far off. We only have to go another like 180 years to get to The Matrix. Dune's like thousands of years in the future. That's like way off the charts, but Idiocracy. Well, everybody's already wearing Crocs, so it's very weird to think about, because some of these things that they were worried about in these movies are like definitely issues that we're already facing. But that's not just great science fiction literature. It's great literature. It's like dealing with the kind of anxieties that we have today that are always about the future, because you don't actually have anxieties about today. You have what might happen today, or in the imminent future. So great sci-fi is good at that because it taps into those things. The Matrix setting itself in 1999 and being like, this was it. This is the peak of like our civilization. And then like 9/11 happening a couple years later, and like, I don't know, it felt like, wow, I wonder if that was a little bit of a prophecy for America right there. Like,
that's why a lot of that's still very far right conservative that we're living in the matrix. That's stupid. And some people get that.
I'm gonna try that next time I get a speeding ticket. Be like, it's just the Matrix, man. I'd probably be spending the night in jail. Like, okay, what do you want? Nothing, man. I'll take your pills. Yeah, it's definitely a guilty answer for sure. Well, and I think studying history, it's hard because like there's all these great parts about all the different time periods we're going to be looking at, right? And if you take the slavery out of it, and probably the misogyny, the Gone with the Wind stuff is like, well, this is beautiful, and like I don't know if I want to live there, but I'd definitely go vacation there for a week. Like that looks beautiful. But we don't think about the kind of the other things playing out in the background. Like literally in that movie, racism is playing out in the background. It's not brought to the foreground because a lot of what we like to do with history is be nostalgic about things, and things are better than they actually were. I don't know if I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but like I think about all the time whenever I see like an old like, you know, Jane Austen movie, you know, like Sense and Sensibility. I hate those books. There's God, waste of time. But like I get the appeal, I guess. But it's very romanticized, even in the movies. Everybody's walking around with those little potpourris because everything smells like poop everywhere all the time. And people don't bathe. And they poop in buckets and throw it out their windows onto the street. Yeah, you're like, oh, deal breaker. I'm done. I don't want a time machine no more. I am not going back there. Yeah. Like, okay, like, well, we're probably not throwing poop out the windows so much. Well, I mean, that's not most people don't have indoor plumbing at this time. But you know, by the time you get rolling into the 1900s, all right, that's taken care of. But like, people are getting lice all the time, you know, like just there's all kinds of stuff that we don't really think about in terms of the scope of like, yeah, maybe everything wasn't all great back then. And you know, I think that's important to think about when we think about slogans like "Make America Great Again." Well, when is again? When is the time you're talking about? Yeah, like, right. It never was. It was like, oh, okay. Well, you know what? Maybe for a white dude, it was better in the 60s. I mean, I don't know. It wasn't live, but like, it certainly wasn't better for people of color. You know, it certainly wasn't better for anybody in the queer community. Like, it's like, it's certainly, you know, it wasn't better for women. Like, and it probably wasn't better for white guys either, in reality. Because, you know, I mean, that's I find that those, in whatever systems of injustice, the people that are like in the oppressor category are equally as damaged in different ways than the oppressed. Like, it's like very unhealthy and toxic and dehumanizing and all of those things to people that are operating in those ways of power. So it's like, I don't think it was better for anybody, but you know, everybody mowed their lawns back then, at least, damn it. Look at the neighborhoods today. You know, it's like, well, yeah, okay, I guess so. Yeah, there were less cars back then, and so less traffic. Yeah, that would have been nice. You know, it would have been nice to not have a cell phone and people can get a hold of you just anytime they want. I remember those days. There's a lot of freedom in that. People are like, you've been abducted. You know, you're like, I've been offline for 20 minutes. Like, a few years ago, I had had enough and I bought one of the old, like, blue Nokia, not a flip phone, like the old ones. It was like the first one I had. I bought it off eBay and I was in the T-Mobile store in the mall for like 2 hours. The manager was like, I can't figure out how to get this. And then he was finally like, oh, I think this is on an Australian bandwidth or something. I'm like, damn, I think to check that. But I was like, I don't care if I can't have a camera and music in my headphones. And I just don't, it's too much. But it didn't work. So I stayed in the matrix and I never got to red pill my way out of this thing. Is it red pill or blue pill?
I think red pills are the big marketing thing. They want to get that from their side. Blue pills supposed to be like the Democrats and that being the power.
But when does the drinking of the baby's adrenal glands come in?
That's what I want. That's the real thing.
Oh my goodness. All right, well, I'm going to end this recording here.